The project focuses on a group of African-American Muslim youth who have withdrawn from schools in the US and migrated to Medina by Senegal for an educational experience that they anticipate will be more affirming than what is available to them in the US. Drawing on ethnographic fieldwork in Medina Bay, New York City, Detroit, Atlanta, and Washington, DC. The project analyzes how these youths' experience abroad shape their aspirations and provide them new ways of envisioning what it means to learn at the intersection of being young, Black, and Muslim. So first up, Dr. Samihah Rehman. Next, we have Angelica Lindsey Ali, who's also known to many as the Village Auntie. She's a certified sexual health educator, researcher, author, curator of woman-centered spiritual intensives, and a recognized authority in intimacy cultivation in Islamic marriage and emotional well-being. She leads a global following of women spanning 86 countries who love her practical, heart-centered advice on love, intimacy, and relationships. Angelica offers workshops and resources on cultivating spirituality, maximizing divine feminine attributes, love, intimacy, relationships, traditional approaches to sexuality, and feminine gender identity within the context of traditional West and East African societies. Welcome, Sister Angelica. And the final woman on our panel is Farah El-Sharif, soon to be Dr. Farah El-Sharif. So I think I'm going to refer to her as Doctor from now. Dr. Farah El-Sharif, who's currently doing her PhD at Harvard University. She is a scholar of Islamic intellectual history. She grew up in Amman, Jordan, and has lived and done research in Egypt, Morocco, and Senegal. Her PhD dissertation is on the most widely circulated 19th century West African Islamic text. She received 2 masters in Islamic studies, one from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, and the other from Harvard University's Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. She has completed her undergraduate degree at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service with a focus on culture and politics. Farah has received numerous awards for her work, such as the International Institute for Islamic Thought's Rising Scholar Fellowship, mashallah, and the Kenneth W. Russell Fellowship from the American Center for Oriental Research. Her work has been published in the Contemporary Levant Journal, Islamic Scholarship in Africa, New Directions and Global Contexts, and news outlets such as CNN, mashallah. So if I can ask Dr. Samihah and Dr. Farah to put your cameras on so we can see you, inshallah. Wonderful, mashallah. So as you can see, these are learned and accomplished women. And as much as this is a very serious conversation, a very serious panel discussion, and we're gonna, we're dealing with women of absolute knowledge. For me, this is also a feminine space where I get to discuss with my sisters all of the things that make my heart absolutely excited. But I think for me, what I think this space and this conversation is about is what happens when spaces are made for women to access knowledge, exoteric and esoteric knowledge. What can we learn from this living legacy of the tradition of female scholarship and leadership in West Africa, right? What happens when these spaces exist and they are open to women, and what can we extract from this tradition, inshallah? So of course, we know nothing exists within a vacuum. I told you about my subjective experience in Senegal and Medina Bay, but I want to begin by exploring the context, the wider historical context in West Africa. So Farah, I want to begin with you. I want to ask you, what is so unique about female scholarship in West Africa? What was the reason for this culture of female scholarship? I know you mentioned particularly from the 19th century. How did it also relate to the rest of the Muslim world at the time?
Yeah, Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and special salams and love to my fellow panelists and sisters. As Sister Sukina was saying, this is not just a gathering of, a strategic panel or anything like that. For me, it's a gathering of friends and sisters, and I share the sentiment. So wonderful question. Thank you for, sort of framing that to start us off. I personally love to begin with a story that I feel typifies the spirit of female scholarship in West Africa. Because this is not a historical quip of a legendary woman who passed away centuries ago. This woman, may Allah preserve her and give her a long life, is alive and is called Sayyidah Ruqayya Niyas. And she is one of the daughters of the famous 20th century sagely scholar Sheikh Ibrahim Niyas. And she herself is a prolific scholar and author. In fact, you can find her sitting outside the Grand Mosque of Medina Bay in Kaolack, Senegal, most days around Maghrib time after prayer. So if you go and visit on any normal day, inshallah, you will find her there. So apparently she was frequently sent by her father on missions to teach men and women across West Africa and Mali, Ghana, Sierra Leone, and Nigeria. And in a letter to her, Sheikh Ibrahim wrote to her, most likely in reference to this prevalent assumption that women shouldn't travel alone, okay? So he said to her the following: I forbid the ignorant and the greedy from traveling. As for you, you are authorized. Wherever you step foot shall be a blessed place. And in another letter, he prayed for her, may God bless anybody who takes knowledge from you, even if it is a single letter. So this for me sort of captures the spirit of what we are gonna hopefully be talking about today. But one of the first things that we realize when looking at the phenomenon of Muslim female scholarship in West Africa is that, let's admit, we know very little about it. There are many reasons why this is. To me, primarily, it's because we are dealing with a two-headed beast of racial Eurocentric bias and otherization, coupled with sexist prejudice when it comes to taking women, let alone African women, as serious figures of knowledge and authority. I mean, first off, many of us are not even familiar with the female scholars of Islam historically, starting from Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha to Sayyidah Nafisa, the great-granddaughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was a teacher to Imam Shafi'i and even led his janazah prayer. And I guess even if we know a little bit about that, we maybe tend to think that these figures are, a thing of the past. For me, the ironic thing that happened with the advent of modernity and colonialism is that instead of hearing more about female scholars with the knowledge boom of the printing press and mass communication and the internet now, we actually know less and less. But inshallah, panels like this are, helping remedy that, these wrong assumptions. But I really think that this erasure was sort of in a direct interest of the colonial project. After all, it is much easier to maim and control a people and their collective consciousness if we all somehow buy into the narrative that Muslim women are oppressed and ignorant and they're left out. And so we start internalizing that ourselves. But the truth is, female scholars never ceased to exist in any field, whether it was fiqh, Quran, logic, aqidah, tazkiyah, over the vast majority of Muslim caliphates, eras, and milieus. So I like to argue that by and large in modernity, and I say this as an Arab, while the Arab-speaking people were busy being asked to conform or react or be against sort of Europhone ideals, the West African Islamic tradition, especially of female scholarship, was quietly carrying the baton. And they're preserving something that is now largely lost in many parts of the Muslim world. I think this really needs to be highlighted because our spiritual and intellectual health as an ummah is at stake. And it's decaying further and further. Without this knowledge, we can no longer afford to overlook it because its lessons may very well hold the keys to transcending this discourse deadlock that we are in. So we can't ignore people like Fatima al-Fihriya, the founder of the first university, the Qarawiyyin in 1859. We can't ignore people like Sheikha Nana Asma'u, who knew 4 languages like Arabic, Fula, Hausa, Tuareg, and she was the daughter of the Usman Dan Fodio, the leader of the Sokoto Caliphate, an advisor to him, wrote endless poetry, founded or actually continued the tradition of jajis, who were just establishing women that would go around in West Africa to teach other women. So I think the time really is ripe to no longer ignore this vast history. Thank you, Sukina.
Thank you, Farah, for kind of setting the stage, as it were, like for providing the context, because I think, you know, nothing exists in a vacuum. And even though some of us may be directly connected to specific communities in West Africa, it's a wider landscape that even allow this type of culture, this tradition to exist. So thank you so much for that. Now, Sister Angelica, especially because we just mentioned Nana Asma'u, Sheikha Nana Asma'u. So, you know, you're the founder of the Village Auntie Institute, a sacred feminine space of faith, education, empowerment. And you mentioned that the work of Nana Asma'u and the ways in which she created her community inspired your work. So I guess my question is two parts. Firstly, what attracted you to her work? And secondly, how has her legacy inspired your work?
Sure. I think I first heard the name Nana Asma'u. So I'm a convert to Islam. I think it's important to mention that as well. I converted to Islam in 1998 after 4 years of study. I was at the University of Michigan studying for my degree in African and African American studies. And I think I first came across the name Nana Asma'u in somewhere around 2003, 2002, 2003. I had long been out of university and I was trying to find a blueprint for women seeking sacred knowledge, women who looked like me. By that time, I had been a Muslim for about 5 years, and I came across the book by Jean Boyd, The Caliph's Sister. And what drew me to that book was the subtitle, the last word in the subtitle, which said leader. And I said, oh, Muslim women can be leaders? Like, we can do that? Like, is that possible? I knew that there was an Arab and North African blueprint in terms of women's scholarship, but to see it from a West African lens was very intriguing. And so that began my study of her life and her work. And the way that it has informed the work that I do with the Village Auntie Institute and just working with women globally is it really has, it's the foundation. The Yantaru movement, Farah just mentioned the Jajis, these women who were deputized to take this Islamic education and spread it to other women is something that I've tried to replicate in my work through rites of passage programs and just working with women globally, not only African women, but women who are seeking and want to get information. It's intriguing to me because as a woman of a certain age, um, as a woman who I'm sort of past my childbearing years now, it always attracted me to her, the fact that she worked with women in sort of two different phases of life. So she worked with younger women who were not yet married, young girls, prepubescent girls who were not yet married. And then she worked with women who were like me, you know, who had already had their children, who had already had families. These are the women that she would teach Quran, she would teach using poetry, you know, women's circles, a very feminine way of delivering sacred knowledge and traditional Islamic education, but also being mindful of the fact that there are periods in our life, generally those, you know, those childbearing years, whether you have children or not, that you are nurturing communities and families. You're taking care of parents, you're taking care of, you know, people in the community, you're building your business, you're doing all of these things. So that really attracted me within a modern context, this, you know, this centuries old movement and how it is applicable in the 21st century. So when people look at the Village Auntie Institute and they look at the work that I do, I would hope that they are seeing the remnants of Nana Asma'u's legacy in what I'm you know, imparting. And I'll just, Farah mentioned the quote from Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, and I think it is important to also note that Sheikh Usman Danfodio, who was the father of Nana Asma'u, he had a quote, and I'm paraphrasing, I may be doing a terrible job of paraphrasing, but he said, if you look at the evil of keeping women in ignorance and the evil of women mixing with men, the greater evil is to keep women in ignorance. Because the first evil is directly related to faith. The second, quote unquote, evil is directed to lineage. And faith trumps lineage every time. And so these were great men who were examples, you know, for us even in 2021 of what it means to be a steward of the faith, what it means to be a mukmin, what it means to be a leader. And they were not only encouraging their daughters to study, they were pushing them to the forefront. And I think that there's a poignant message in that for all of us.
Wonderful, fantastic. I really appreciate what you said. And I think for someone who knows your work and has seen your work, I didn't know until we started this conversation that it was connected to the legacy of Nana Asma'u. So it's even inspired me even more to kind of look more into her life. So Sister Samihah, your field of research and work has been on the living legacy of education in West Africa and how it's benefited hundreds, if not thousands, of American youth, particularly African-American youth, who studied Islamic knowledge, particularly the memorization of the Quran in Medina Bay. So again, my questions are two parts. The first is in relation to the young women who travel there to study. What role do you think this historical legacy that we've been speaking about of Islamic female scholarship, what role do you think it has played in, allowing young women to feel as though they have a space to pursue Islamic knowledge, right? So that's the first question. How has this legacy shaped the fact that young American women are leaving their homes, leaving their families to come and study? How has that informed this tradition? And secondly, what was the stance of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, the founder of Medina Bay, with regards to women's education?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for those thoughtful questions. I'm really excited to be on this panel, and already, I've just heard so many jewels and gems. So thank you all so much. So the first thing, just to kind of give a numerical snapshot of things, there are more African-American. So my research, as Sukina mentioned, is on the African-Americans who come from the US to Medina Bay to study Quran, right? So these are young people who, some of them are as young as 8 years old, and some of them go until they're 19, 20. There's people in their 20s as well. So the majority of the young people who come to Medina Bay from the US to study are actually girls and young women, right? Like that in of itself, I think is a really important thing to highlight, because there's, overall, as Farah mentioned, because of patriarchy and misogyny and all of these things that exist in so many Muslim communities, we often think about even Islamic education as something that is particularly important for boys, right? But you see this is a community in which since the 1980s, so many girls and young women have been coming to memorize Quran. For example, the first African-American woman that we know of who actually finished memorizing Quran, became a Hafiza of Quran, was a woman named Amina Abdul Karim Niasse, right? And so she finished at the school that was built here, I say here because I'm virtually there, was built in Medina Bay, right? So it's very common. And these girls and young women who are coming from the US, they're stepping into a society in which it's very normal for girls to get education, right? All children, boys and girls historically and contemporarily in the Senegambia region tend to go to Quran schools, right? It's not just something that the boys do, everybody is doing it, right? And this is particularly important for young people coming from the US, where we live in a society where men and women are constantly pursuing education and have access to those opportunities, right? So when they come from that context to this West African Muslim Sufi society, it's very much in line with their own experiences. And then, as Farah started to mention, once they come to Medina Bay, it's like they're being surrounded by this living legacy of empowered and educated Muslim women, right? She mentioned Sayyidah Ruqayya Niasse, who these young people, I see them, right? They go to the mosque after Maghrib and then they come to greet Sayyidah Ruqayya. And similar to the story that Sukina was mentioning, it's like they see the ways in which men and women revere these women, come to them for knowledge, right? They see other women in the community, like Fatu, the oldest daughter of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, who recently passed away, may Allah be pleased with her. They see the ways in which she held so much knowledge, and how her own sons, the current Grand Imam of Medina Bay, Imam Sheikh Tijani Sise, his brother Sheikh Mahi Sise, all of these people are really going to them for advice and counsel and things like that. They see how, and so I think this is part of this tradition that exists in Medina Bay. And even Sheikh Ibrahim's own daughters, right? He really educated them and emphasized that. He's famously quoted to have encouraged women to compete with men in knowledge, right? So I already mentioned two of his daughters. Another one of his daughters, Sheikha Maryam Niasse, She, may Allah be pleased with her, recently passed away as well. She had a Quran school in Dakar that has educated, thousands of students. And not only did she start her own school, but her own children started their own offshoot schools and things like that. So it's like this living legacy of continuing to educate. So I think, yeah, I think it's really significant and very normal, right? There's no question of whether or not it should happen, because in West Africa, this is very normal. And then this is the legacy that African Americans are really, built upon as they come there as well.
Already, it's just so fantastic when you kind of talk about a living tradition, because it's something that we're connected to. So I go to Medina Bay every year, but I didn't know actually, but it makes sense that most of the students that travel from the US are women actually. The two times I've been there, and I've been there when women, the young American students have completed the Quran, it has been women. So thank you for bringing that. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So you mentioned Sheikh Mariam. So I want to go back to Village Auntie, to Sister Angelica, because you mentioned that Sheikh Mariam Niasse was another inspirational figure in your work, right? As a contemporary female scholar, as an educator, spiritual leader, may Allah be pleased with her and bless her. Who you said, not only did she establish schools to teach Quran, but she was also a spiritual guide to men and women. And you referred to her work as revolutionary, right? That was the word that you used. So tell me why you regard her work as revolutionary. And once again, how has it impacted and inspired the work that you do?
So I think her work is revolutionary in her ability to harness tradition to disseminate a message worldwide. I think a lot of times we look at something being revolutionary as being something that's new. And I think her revolutionary stance is that she took something that's very, very old and made it relevant to young people, to men, to women, to people within modern societies. And I think the most revolutionary aspect of Sheikha Mariam's work is that she did everything from her room, like literally from her room. She was not a person who was very much in the public eye, although she did travel with her father, and she did a lot of work in terms of building political bridges between Senegal and Sudan, Senegal and Iran. This was a woman that presidents would call when they needed to mediate conflict, when they needed to get advice. But she did everything from within the confines of her home. It doesn't mean that she was, forced to stay there, but she chose to be in that space. She chose to be the queen of her home, and from that space she built institutions that, Dr. Samihah said have taught thousands and thousands of people worldwide. I also think she was revolutionary because she was an example of what it meant to be a strong mother, not only to the people in the community, but to her actual children. Her son, Dr. Usman Khan, is one of the most prolific scholars of the West African Islamic intellectual tradition. He owes that to his upbringing, and to have a mother who was like that. Sheikh Ibrahim said, our women are like men and our men are like mountains. He came from a mountainous woman. And I think for so many of us in this present day, we look at strength as being something that makes us akin to men. And I think what Sheikha Mariam did is she was able to show that you can be uniquely seated in your feminine power and still be impactful. And so that is what I look to in my work. I don't have to, everything that I do from my home. I'm sitting in my living room right now. My children are upstairs. After I finish this, I'll go and prepare a meal for them. It doesn't, being a person who is domestic and, very traditional in my roles at home does not diminish my power in the public sphere. And I think that is revolutionary. And that's something that I learned from Sheikha Mariam, from Sayyidah Ruqayya, from Nana Asma, from all of these women. These are our examples and our ideals. And I would hope that with discussions like this, we can encourage more women to look at our traditional examples. What did our mothers do? What did our grandmothers do? How were they able to build institutions and be pillars of their communities, but still retain their power as women? I think there's something that's very profound in that.
Oh, I love that response. Absolutely. So Farah, I want to come back to you. So we've gone from the contemporary, and I want to go back to the historical, back to the heritage of these women who, in our pre-conversation, I love this word, you refer to them as alpha female scholars, right? So I want to ask you just to share some examples of women that inspire you, but maybe many of our audience members may not be aware of. And once again, you know, I'd like you to share with us about these women, but once again, how their legacy has impacted you as a female scholar as well.
I mean, just the top of my head when Sister Angelica said Professor Usman Khan, so he's my PhD advisor. So in a sense, if it weren't for the barakah of Sayyidah Maryam supporting him becoming, you know, world-class scholar, I wouldn't be able to do my PhD with him. Subhanallah. So may Allah have mercy on her soul, continue to bless her soul because of all the good that is rippling through, inshallah, forevermore. So my own dissertation is on West Africa's most widely circulated text in the 19th century. In fact, my Zoom background is an image from the manuscript that I've been staring at for, I don't know what, 2 to 3 years. It's called the Rehman of Sheikh Omar Fouti. He's he is the earliest Khalifa of the Tijani Sufi order in West Africa. So it's very interesting through my readings of this text. He has a chapter on his own authority as Khalifa. So you would imagine this to have very sort of masculine proofs, right? That the so-and-so leader called me this and that. But you know what he uses to verify his status? Essentially visions from his daughter, Fatima al-Madaniyah. He reveres her so highly, and he just lists the visions that she has as proofs of divine aid and support. So through my studies of the time period, it's 19th century, it is obvious that a lot of these women came from powerful scholarly families who transformed the landscape of Islam in West Africa, primarily through their anti-colonial projects that were undergirded by Sufi and educational reform. So we know like Ahmadu Bamba's daughter, Maimuna Kubra, and his other daughter, Maimuna Sughra, and we listed Usman Dan Fodier's daughter, and daughters actually, who Nana Asma'u even advised her brother, Muhammad Bello, who was the bosom friend of Omar Tal, who I work on. So these, you know, women, they were, you know, navigating a lot, during these very contentious times politically. They had an undeniable agency to traverse the unseen and the seen sort of material world. But it is the unseen where their true power lay. So today we have this obsession with visibility, that women need to be seen to be heard. But these women knew that there was so much power in being an unseen, which did not mean that they were invisible or had no agency or not there. Quite the contrary. These women very much embodied that because their fathers made way and made space for them, not just as, you know, harbingers of barakah, which they were, but they were also authoritative figures in and of themselves. So in the academic study of, you know, the Islamic tradition in West Africa, they tend to privilege the production of texts as a marker of intellectual production. And some did that. So I really like to talk about a scholar called Khadija bint Muhammad al-Daymaniyah. She was a logician. She wrote a treatise on mantiq. She specialized in grammar, theology, law, and she was considered the most, you know, unparalleled woman of her time in terms of, I should mention that she's considered Baydan, a white Arab, kind of like me. But what's so special about her, she was from Mauritania, but she advised Senegambian leaders like Abdul Qadir Khan. And I have to credit my professor, my teacher, Professor Bouchouer, who talks about this constantly, and in light of the sort of abolitionist movement. So Abdul Qadir Khan was one of the only or earliest Muslim abolitionist leaders from West Africa, 2 centuries before Christian Europeans were talking about abolishing the slave trade. He did that. And guess who his teacher was? Khadija bint Muhammad al-Daymaniya. She was his faqihah, she was his teacher, she was his frame of reference. So in a sense, if it weren't for her and her authority and her fatawa, her relationship with Abdul Qadir Khan, we would not sort of have this incredibly immense rich history of the first Muslim abolitionist movement in Senegambia, that someone like in 1789 in the US, the North American continent, Reverend Thomas Clarkson, he knew about them and he wrote about Al-Mami Abdul Qadir. And she was the bedrock for that. So how significant and how important is that, and how little do we know? Yeah.
Thank you for that, Farah. And I think, you know, what I guess I attain from that, it reminds me of, you know, an Erykah Badu lyric where she says, the man that knows something knows that he knows nothing at all. Like the more you learn, the more you realize you know nothing at all. You know what I mean? That you opening, and just 2 women, right? It suddenly opened the possibility or the potentiality of how many unnamed women, you know, were present in that context. So thank you so much for that. So we're going to come back now to Farah, looking again at the modern history, right? The modern history, the modern education in Medina Bay. I guess something that I heard you say in another talk where you were kind of really talking about the contribution of the women, particularly the women from the US, who worked hard to create the environment for the students to study, right? So it's one thing, okay, these students are going to study Quran, but it's a whole community effort. It's not just them, but there are many people that are working to create this space, particularly women, right? So the role of the mothers, the role of the women who actually stayed in Senegal as motherly figures, those who contributed financially. So I guess I want you to kind of tell me about the role of the women in helping to cultivate these spaces for the education to take place. You know, I've got always 2-part questions, part 1. And part 2, the role of khidmah, right? The role of sacred service in relation to leadership as well. So I kind of really want you to tell me about that, and also khidmah, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. And actually they're, you know, very much related, right? Like a lot of the leadership that these women that I'm about to tell you about provided, this is their khidmah, their service to their shuyukh, their service on behalf of the community and for the pleasure of Allah. So we've mentioned so many names here, but Sheikh Ibrahim's grandson, Sheikh Hassan Sise, may Allah be pleased with him, he was really instrumental in bringing the message of the Tijani Tariqa to the United States, right? Throughout his life, starting in 1975, he would travel to the US, visit working class communities in urban centers of the US. And he would, you know, really connect with a lot of African Americans who then ultimately, you know, joined the Tariqa, and he invited them to come to Medina Bay, right? And so kind of become introduced to and be connected to this tradition of West African Islamic scholarship. And so one of the earliest people to do that was a woman named Sister Karima Abdul Karim, right? She went to Medina Bay, she went there a couple of times. And one of the times that she spent a little bit more time there, she was just amazed at like looking around, seeing all these children reciting Quran, seeing how Islam was such a big part of these people's lives, like all the dhikr. And she was really incredibly inspired. And so she came home and she wrote this hand wrote the 7-page letter to Sheikh Hassan when she said, and in which she said, you know, I have this idea, we should start this school for American children to come to Medina Bay and to actually learn, right? And she's like, and you know what? I'm going to move. I'm going to take my daughter with me. I'm going to take my stepchildren with me. And I'll actually be there, right? Like, so if you approve it and you facilitate it, I'll take care of them on a day-to-day basis. And then this is the start of the African American Islamic Institute, which is a school that was started in 1983 in Medina Bay by Sheikh Hassan, Sheikh Ibrahim's grandson, and Sister Karima Abdul Karim, right? So from the very beginning, a lot of these visions and the work of doing this was, you know, very much done by women. And so she was there, she was calling people up in the US, asking, okay, I know your child's not there, but I need you to come financially support this school and whatever else. And this is kind of the model that we see even from our own history, right? The prophetic history, the legacy of Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha. There's always around the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam all of these really incredible women who are financially and through their own labor and time really dedicating dedicating a lot of work, right? And then after her, Sister Karima stayed there for many years. She was like the mother for all of these American children who were thousands of miles away from their own parents. Imagine this is in the 80s and 90s. It's expensive to, you know, visit internationally. It's expensive to even call on a phone card, right? So that they really trusted her. They trusted Sheikh Hassan to kind of take care of their children, right? Make sure they're getting fed and being bathed and whatever else. After her, another sister named Sister Tawhida Abedin, she, you know, for so long, her own children studied in Medina Bay. She worked as a street vendor in Harlem. She worked as a janitor at an Islamic school in New Jersey. She did all of these backbreaking things just to raise enough money for her children to go study over there. You know, like nowadays you think about study abroad, it's like an expensive thing that, you know, a lot of people can't afford, but these are the sacrifices that women, mothers were making to provide their children with this education. And then the last one that I'll mention is like bringing it to the very present day. Right now, the majority of the American students who are there are studying at a school called the AAII, it's African American Islamic Institute Legacy Academy. And this was a school started by Sayyidah Kubra Askari Sise, who herself is a Hafiza of Quran. She is from Atlanta. She is the wife of Sheikh Muhammadu Mahi Sise. And during Sheikh Hassan's time, Sheikh Hassan had encouraged her after, you know, Sister Karima and Sister Tawhida and stuff had kind of moved back to the US. Sheikh Hassan had put a lot of the younger students with her. At this time, she was like in her 20s, and already Sheikh Hassan is putting like, okay, Kubra, this girl is coming, I need her to stay with you. And so since 2003, all of these young women had been staying in her own home. And in 2017, she built a dormitory, right, with her own, out of her own wealth. She built a dormitory for these students and then eventually started a school, right, for them that is continuing on. That most recently, you know, a couple of children have already finished memorizing Quran. And so with that, I just want to add one last thing. Like, we talk about these important legacies and these inspirational stories, and it's important for us to be moved by these narratives, but also to kind of support, right? So I do want to just make a quick plug for this school, right? This is a living legacy that exists, you know, really founded and started by a young woman, right? An African-American Muslim woman. And so and is providing educational opportunities for young women to continue to study. And so the school is called AAII Legacy Academy. I really encourage you all to go to their website. It's aaiilegacyacademy.com. You can donate, you can support these efforts, because I think, again, it's always important for us to pair these inspirational stories with actually, you know, supporting it with our finances, which, you know, is an important thing we can't get around. So yeah.
Thank you, Samihah. Thank you so much for mentioning that and for just bringing it to the present day, right? Giving us this kind of history, contemporary history. And please do, if you can put the link in the bio so people can check it out, that would be really, really helpful. Wonderful. So we've got about 15 minutes left, so we're going to need to and I've still got quite a few things I want to get out of these wonderful women, so hopefully we have enough time. So my next question is for you, Sister Angelica. We spoke about the concept of the divine feminine, right, through a West African lens. So I want you to kind of maybe share with us, and you kind of mentioned this idea of, in your experience, you noticed a difference in the embodiment of worship, right, which is unique to the region. So I guess I just want you to let us know what the divine feminine means to you and what you've experienced within the West African manifestation of that.
So I knew this question was coming up, so I took notes, because once I start talking about the divine feminine, I can go on for quite a long time. I think when you use the phrase divine feminine, Muslims get nervous, because they're like, are you trying to say Allah is a woman? That has nothing to do with it at all, right? There are masculine and feminine qualities that are imbued within the names of Allah, right? The 99 names of Allah, there are masculine and feminine elements. It does not mean that Allah is masculine or feminine. It means that there always has to be a balance, right? If Islam is the middle path, it teaches us that there has to be balance. And for women, we have a unique ability to access the divine feminine. So this is the subtle power, the power of creativity, creation, and growth. It is a generative power. There's a subtlety, there's forgiveness, tenacity, strength, loving, nurturing, reconciliation. These are all things that come to mind. And when we think about names of Allah, we think about Al-Batin, right? Al-Wadud, Al-Ghafur, Al-Jamal, right? Al-Hakim, Ya Latif. You know, when you say Ya Latif, it just puts me into a mindset of the divine feminine. It is not performative femininity, so it's not lipstick and high heels, right? It is also not this gendered notion of labor. The women cook, the women change the diapers, right? Because that's not even our prophetic ideal. You know, the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was a man who he would help around his household. He was very gentle with his children. That is an aspect of the divine feminine. And when you're in a West African context, so I just came back from Medina Bay. I think my body is back, but my mind is still in Medina Bay. You see the divine feminine present absolutely in the women, in their comportment, in their elegance, in their commitment to whatever it is they are engaged in at the time. If it's dhikr, if it's Quran reading, if it's rearing children, if it's cooking, if it's just engaging, there is an intent, attentiveness that you see. But you also see the divine feminine displayed in the men. One of the things that I talked about on an Instagram live from Medina Bay was the fact that when we would go to iftar with Sheikh Mahi, you would see the men were serving the food. The men were pouring the tea. The men were making sure when I got off of my flight that I had water, that I had fruit, that I had bread. The men were making sure that I was taken care of. And these are things that I think in the West we think are gendered activities for women. But when we look at it from a divine feminine aspect, these are men who have that balance. These are very manly men, sometimes very big, strong men with, that fit that image of what we think to be a man's man, but they're behaving in a very divine feminine way. And I think that this is displayed in all of the women scholars that were mentioned today, but it's also present in their fathers. This is why Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse and Usman Danfodio and Sheikh Umar Futital, that's why they could cede some of their power and empower their daughters, because they have that balance of divine feminine and divine masculine. And I think by keeping their names and their legacies alive, we continue to imbue that and impart that to our generations now.
Thank you so much. And I know if we had more time, I'm sure we could really flesh out this kind of conversation much, much, much more. But part 2, MFest, part 2, female West African legacy. Okay, so Sister Farah, I want to ask you also to contribute to this conversation, right? Because something that you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, you mentioned this idea that within the Islamic tradition, we have these sort of celestial archetypes of women, of role models that are for the most part, unattainable, right? Or out of reach for the average Muslimah. So what is your experience or your understanding of this in relation to the feminine examples in West Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Sukina. So one theorist I like posits that when it comes to studying women in sort of, let's say, classical Islamic studies, so they tend to fall under one of two categories, either the ideal feminine or the lower female. The divine feminine is usually represented by the likes of Mother Mary, Fatima Zahra radiallahu anhum, as sort of the mythical beloved who represents the universal longing for God, while actual women are just depicted as female, denoting a being whose animal attributes prevail over her spiritual nature. This dichotomy probably added to sort of this maybe patriarchal sort of dismissal of later women, and why we perceive many living or historical women to be kind of neglected, because they always seem to fall short of this divine feminine ideal. This is why I feel like sort of female scholars in West Africa have less hang-ups about the bridging of these two binaries. Ultimately, we tend to forget that these sacred archetypes cried, they laughed, they got sick, they got weak, they felt fear, sadness, anger, and apprehension. One hadith that I absolutely love, it's probably my ultimate favorite. So it reminds me of when the Prophet ﷺ passed away, Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha asked his beloved daughter, Sayyidah Fatima, what made her cry and then laugh when she was at his bedside as he was passing away, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. She answered, when he told me he was going to die, I cried. Then he told me I would be the first member of his family to join him in heaven, so I laughed. And this kind of, for me, really represents how we are, how the world doesn't want us to be too much, too emotive, laughing, crying, like just But this is something that was, celebrated. And in fact, in the sacred hadith tradition of this, mother of all believers saying, I laughed and I cried, and this beautiful sort of union. And in the Quran itself, Allah adhaka wa abka. Allah is the one who makes us cry, and Allah makes us laugh. Even the word rahm from rahma is very much tied to women. And this whole topic, like if we want to get into it, as Sister Angelica, knows, I mean, this is her bread and butter. You could talk about it, all night, and it still wouldn't be enough. But for me, what I love so much about these incredible women that we study, whether in the past or living, they kind of just comfortably bridge the mundane and the sacred, the otherworldly and the worldly, the so-called masculine and feminine. They have this kind of graceful ownership, sort of effortless ownership of their status as both otherworldly, sort of harbors of the divine feminine, as well as they're very comfortable in the bodily female, where they cook and they clean and they talk and they, chit chat and this and that. So it's just very comfortable, and they're not very caught up in this Western obsession with being represented and sort of gender parity. That's all well and good, and it's in its own context. I'm just saying that in that context, it doesn't occupy so much of doesn't consume them as much as it does in other parts of the world. So they kind of just take up their rightful space of authority within traditional roles that are both empowering and that evolve as well. And they're not kind of feigning perfection that we often try to project on women. Yeah.
I'm almost feeling so saddened because I know that everyone is having to squash what they want to say, because we only have about 5 more minutes before we open the floor for questions. But I just want to respond quickly to Farah, because the last time I saw the mother of Sheikh Mahi Yafatu, who passed away, I remember we went to her room, and her granddaughters are there with their babies breastfeeding. One of her half Mauritanian granddaughters are selling melfas and traditional dress, and there's kids screaming and whatever. It's like a feminine. Her daughter's on the bed with her, and then she was, in her life, Sheikh Ibrahim had made her the custodian of a prophetic relic, right? So we went to greet her, but also to get the barakah from this relic that she has. And so out comes this relic, right, in the context of this very domestic setting. And here we are having this really profound, sublime moment with this relic that is connected to Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. And I think for me, again, that kind of encapsulates what you mentioned about the kind of femininity. It's very feminine. They're not trying to discard or step away from traditional roles, like you mentioned, but they are always in communion and in connection to the divine. Okay, so I'm going to ask you one more question, all of you. I'm just going to maybe Samihah, Angelica, and Farah. So in that order, if you just respond, it's the same question. So we've spoken about the legacy, right? The heritage of West African female scholarship and how it's inspired and impacted your work. But now I'd like to ask you how this context, whether it be women in particular or just the context of West African female leadership, how has it impacted your own faith and your own spiritual journeys as female leaders and female scholars? How has their legacy informed you as a woman of God or as a woman of faith? So let's start with Samihah.
Yeah, so I think for me, it comes down to 2 things. One, recognizing whether it be because of Sheikh Ibrahim or even all of the stories that I've heard of his grandson, Sheikh Hassan, how they were so intentional about making sure that there were spaces for women to be visible and to actually have access to direct knowledge, right? So being part of this community, again, for like the last 10 years or so, it's like I've always had opportunities to sit with the shuyukh. I've always had opportunities to kind of really get this knowledge firsthand. And so that has been really important and incredible for me. And I think the other thing is, as we've been talking about khidma, right? You see so many, as much as there are women who are very visible public leaders in political spaces and whatever else, there are also as many women that we've mentioned who are doing a lot of khidma. They're really doing the hard work of making these things run, right? Whether it's everyday laboring in the kitchen to feed hundreds of people, guests of the shuyukh, whether it be, caring for children, children, whether it be like just putting their money up to support these things, you know, like working so that they can do that. I think for me, it's just really incredible to see for women that, for people in general, but women in particular, khidma is such an important part of your journey in Islam, in the spiritual path. So I've really learned that. And the best examples of khadims, I think for me, the most inspirational ones have been these women. So I think those two things have been most meaningful for me.
Thank you so much, Samihah. And Sister Angelica.
I think for me, what I take most from their legacy is spiritual connection and ancestral heritage. As an African American woman who cannot trace my 5th or 6th generation grandmother, I can borrow the grandmothers of our spiritual traditions. And when I went back to Medina Bay and, you know, had this, you know, expansive experience, and I came back and I sent Sheikh Mahi a message and said, I really miss Medina. I can't wait until I can come back. And he sent a message and said, this is absolutely your home. And you really feel as if you have this level of connection. And I think what a lot of African Americans, Muslim and not, are seeking is that sense of ancestral connection. And you really feel that tie. You really feel as if these are our foremothers and we're reclaiming the ways of our foremothers. And in terms of a spiritual connection, they show that it is possible. It is possible to be a mother, to be a wife, to be a daughter, to be a friend, to be a good cook, and to be a Hafiz Quran, to be someone who can, you know, change diapers while you're correcting someone's, you know, recitation. You can have ijazah in all of these sacred sciences and still make sure that you get home at night, you know, and perfume yourself and get ready so that you can spend time and drink tea with your husband on the roof. Like, you don't have to live just within one sphere. You can encompass all of those spaces. And I really am thankful to their legacy for teaching us that not only is it possible, but it is something that we should encourage.
Thank you so much, Sister Angelica. And finally, Sister Farah.
Okay, so wow, it's hard to follow these two acts, but just in a nutshell, I feel like a lot of, sometimes, especially in my field, there's kind of this chauvinism about, like, you know, Salafism, you know, right? Like the Salaf, the pious predecessors, are something that is like on a pedestal. They're the ideals. And there's something that we all can only know through books, through like a few hadith books, and that's it. But this is a living reality. If you want to experience the Salaf, so the feeling maybe that the Sahaba felt a little bit, just a little bit, one that is not based on like politics of piety and modesty and sort of this ethical policing, one that is really just based on love as embodied by sort of the living presence of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that is very much palatable, and it is at the center of the experience of all these figures that I mentioned from 18th, 19th century onwards. This is what kind of drove their social justice impetus, their love of knowledge, making space for their daughters. This is not something that is in spite of the great Islamic tradition. This is because of it. This is very much a traditional orthodoxy that oftentimes, unfortunately, our colored lens, like people tend to say, oh, African Islam is like different, it has all these add-ons, or bid'ah, or these people with their flowing colorful robes. Well, guess what? I mean, Sayyidah Aisha used to wear orange khimar at Hajj, okay? So this is not something that's like super alien to the black and white kind of experience that kind of privileges sort of the modern Salafi, Wahhabi, whatever you call it, normative Islam that we kind of globally all have feel sort of the subjugation of. No, this is kind of like a return to the Salaf, to the Quran and Sunnah, but through a living, breathing thing that is very, very much embodied and experienced if you only open your eyes.
I think you froze just a little bit at the end, but I think you might have been at the end of what you were saying. But I think you're saying it's a literature if we only kind of opened our eyes and saw it for what it is. I'm really thankful to you all for kind of sharing different perspectives of how that tradition has inspired your faith and you as a Muslim woman. And I guess for myself, I would say one of the things that I think is particularly special for me is having a sheikh whose mother was a sheikh, whose auntie was a sheikh, whose aunties are shayukh, and grandmothers, right? And how that impacts my relationship with my teacher as a murid, right? So there are times where I might be asked to speak at a specific gathering or at a specific occasion. I'll ask my sheikh, can I have your blessing? Can I have your permission? And he never says no, right? He's always like, may Allah bless your speech, may Allah bless your words, may Allah benefit people through you, may people be benefited by way of your words. And there was never like, no, I think it's better for you not to speak, or sit down, maybe write it and get a man to say it out loud, right? He constantly encourages and inspires. And I often think how much who he is as a guide is impacted by the women that are around him, right? The women upon whose laps he sat, right? I remember once I asked a sheikh, tell me something miraculous about your mother, tell me something mystical about her. And he said, the biggest karama of my mother is istiqama, right? The biggest miracle is her steadfastness. When she was well, she never missed a salah in the masjid, and she would complete the recitation of the Quran every week. Right, this is the woman that raised him. And so it often makes me think about how that impacts how he is as a guide and as a leader. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for your question, for your responses, for your insight, for your intellect, for your hearts and your dedication to this field. And I'm so excited to see Samihah, when your book comes out, but that's Dr. Farah, when you get your doctorate, when your book comes out, Village Auntie, the more you continue to do, the more women you continue to inspire and educate and elevate. I think there's so much more to come, and I think we're all droplets from this ocean of femininity and leadership that has come from this region. And I'm really happy that all of us are here from different parts of the world. Our roots come from all over, but here we are as beneficiaries of this tradition. So we have 2 questions. Shaheen, let me know if we have time to answer them or what we should do at this stage, because I know we're a little bit over time and we don't want to tire our dear translator Samihah. Okay, cool. So the first question is, they've been, okay, I see that Farah was answering them as we went along. Okay, cool. So I guess I'll read them out, so if anyone else wants to also contribute or wants to respond. So Fatima Musa has asked, for anyone interested in learning more or starting their journey into West African Islamic literature, especially from the female scholarship, where should one start? Dr. Farashi mentioned Joseph Hill's book, which is incredible, called Rapping Authority, and Beverly Mack's work on Nana Asma'u. So I just wanted to ask the other panelists if they had anything else they would want to suggest for Fatima Musa in the beginning of this journey to learning about female scholarship in West Africa.
I think Jean Boyd also has books on Nana Asma'u, and also there is an article, it's not too long, from Mustafa Briggs on West African, I think it's called Female Saints of West Africa. I'm probably not saying the name properly, but it's a rather long article. He talks about the daughters of Sheikh Ibrahim, and he also talks about the daughters of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba in that article as well. And it's something that you could sort of go and read today if you wanted to.
And I believe is that on the Sacred Footsteps website? Yes, right. Yeah, so if you go into the Sacred Footsteps website and maybe type in West African female leadership or scholarship, it should come up. Okay, what was the other question? Okay, so someone said that Wikipedia only mentions the boy children from Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, who is the scholarly daughter, and Farah mentioned and responded by saying Maymuna al-Kubra, Maymuna al-Sughra. Does that mean the big Maymuna and the small Maymuna? Alhamdulillah. So again, I don't know if there are others that anyone wants to mention or that anyone knows of. I guess that article. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The article will mention it, but I just wanted to say this just because I just saw this family yesterday. There's an African American family, and they are part of the Murid community. They're part of the Baifal of the Murid community. And a lot of people don't realize, we know about the Baifal, but we don't know about the Yaifal, right? And the Bifal are women, are the women who are in the
Yes.
Bifal community, and they're very strong. They're very powerful. They have a lot of scholars and female shuyukh amongst their ranks as well. So I think, we can't really trust Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is, those same tools of oppression that Dr. Farah talked about at the very beginning affect these, open source information portals that we have on the internet. So you can't always trust what you find on the internet, but I also think it's important that we support the work of Dr. Samihah and Dr. Farah and all of these women who are bringing these unknown bits of history and legacy to the forefront, because it's important that we support our current academic scholars now and the people who are keeping this tradition alive.
100%, 100%. Thank you so much. And then somebody asked about books to read to complete this brilliant vision. I'm not exactly sure what brilliant vision you're referring to, but Sister Farah again mentioned the works of Zachary Wright, who's again a living contemporary scholar who's doing some incredible work in bringing this kind of heritage of West African scholarship to the forefront. So I believe we're out of time. But once again, I just want to thank all of the panelists for bringing all of their knowledge and all of their hearts to this gathering. I also want to thank Sister Shaheen, to Maslaha, to MFest, to Samihah, who's been working so hard to sign everything that's been said. So I hope we weren't talking too fast or anything for you, but thank you so much for being present to make this conversation a lot more accessible. My name is Sukina Pilgrim, and it's been an absolute honor to be here. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
And also to all the audience members, to all the audience members as well, everyone who's been here and just listened to us and absorbed everything. I'm truly grateful to have you here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Just to echo that, thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Thank you to Sukina, our speakers. It's been an absolute honor to have you. And, inshallah, we would love to do a part 2. So let's see what we can do. Thank you all for the comments and the contributions in the chat box. I know we didn't have time to read them out loud, but hopefully everyone saw them. There was some really valuable nuggets in there as well. Thank you to Samihah, our incredible BSO interpreter. And also please check out Dr. Farah and Dr. Samihah's work and Village Auntie Institute. I can personally recommend the amazing space and the learning that happens in her courses. So please do have a look at that. Also, please check our website, mfest.org, for more events coming up in July, including a hip hop and sci-fi writing workshop, which has sold out, but there is a wait list and there's more to be announced soon. And last of all, thank you for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful evening, and Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Assalamu alaikum. Shaheen, are you there?
Yep, sis, just give me a second.
Okay.
Salams all.
Walaikum salam.
Sukina, that was incredible. That was
Oh my
so good.
God.
Samihah, Auntie.
Ah,
Has Farah left?
I think I don't see her
I
here.
think she
Maybe
might have had to go. She was asking, she was saying she
a
might
bit
have to
late.
go.
Yeah.
That's totally, yeah. Auntie Angelica, Sumaya, thank you so, so much. That was just, oh, honestly, like my heart is dancing right now.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah.
I just wanted to say, like, I know you guys have been on for a really long time and you've, you know, given us all your energy. Thank you so much for that and just being so generous. My email is in the chat box, so please send me your invoices and I'll sort that out during the week. And yeah, I just wanted to say a massive thank you. And if you would be up for a part 2, and inshallah we find some more funding, then I would absolutely love to do that with you. If you are all up for it. And yeah, I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you. Bottom of my heart, honestly, it was just thank you so much.
Thank you for
That
your
was really wonderful. That was wonderful, really, really wonderful. I just wanted to chip in with some quick feedback. A lot of the names that were mentioned, so culturally we know that a lot of either Arabic-based names or West African-based names tend to be quite long, especially when we're fingerspelling them in BSL. So I did have to omit a lot of names, which is something that I hate doing. I really don't like doing it, but I would have lost what you were saying after that. So inshallah, if there is a part 2, and I will make a dua for part 2 because that was so amazing. Inshallah, if we could note down any names or any people who have influenced you, inshallah, and then share that with the interpreters, then we can memorize them and make sure that we get them out there, inshallah. But that was beautiful and such an honor to interpret for you. Inspirational women. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you, Samihah. Yeah, I was conscious of that. It's like, oh my God, we're talking too fast. And I know because we were limited, like not limited in time, there's just so much to say in a period. I know that I could feel myself speeding up. So I was like, I'm just able to get everything. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much. It was an absolute honor. I loved every second of it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We've recorded it as well. Actually, I'm going to stop the recording. Hold on a second.